Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our fourth session of gardening on the Wildside. It's really fabulous to have all of you here and all of you from Zoom here too. Today's session is all about birds, and we have our special guest presenter, Renee, Ferster, Levy.
And Wren.
And Wren. And it's going to be a very exciting session. Of course, we have our permaculture expert and landscape architect, Steve Batley. I'm Julian, I'm the Sustainability Education Officer here, and we're at the Randwick Community Centre, which is open to the public and is here as a demonstration of all sorts of things that we're talking about. So after this session, if you haven't been here, please come down and check it out. So yes, this used to be, always has been, and always will be Indigenous land, so I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We're on Gadigal and Bidjigal land. So, today in particular, this is particularly for you on Zoom, today in particular I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff on screen share for Renee, which means I definitely won't be seeing any chat messages. So as per usual, please thoughtfully call out where there's a gap, or particularly if there's a question and answer. We really need you to speak out loud. We have a speaker here so that we can all hear you. I'm not going to see your chats today. But I love the way each week there's often been chats going on where you've been helping each other and looking up stuff and sharing it. So it's actually something that we're missing out on here, that you guys are getting. What's really lovely, if you are on Zoom, if you can leave your camera on. It's nice for us, this is meant to be an interactive workshop, so it is really nice for us to be able to see each other. And if you change the name so that we have got your name there. Oh, and when you speak out loud here, it's really helpful to us if you say your name. So just say, this is Macca, and ask your question. Similarly for us here, it's actually helpful for the guys on Zoom who may not have the camera on you, if you can just say, it's me, Jay. It's an excellent time to turn your phones off right now. And then, unless, don't. Smarty pants over here. I'm going to hand over to the smarty pants. See you, everyone.
Thanks, Julian. Hi, Renee.
Hi.
I'm so excited about today. It's amazing. Renee knows so much about birds, you'll never see the world the same again. Before we get on to Renee and learn all about birds, I'll just do a quick recap of last week. So the guys who were here last week, feel free to share what I've got a few questions this time, a slightly different format, so it's a bit of a guided kind of recap. So last week we did native bees. So you might remember there are two main types of native bees. You've got the solitary bees and the other ones that form a hive, live in a colony. What do they eat?
Pollen.
Pollen and nectar. What was the second one? Yes, exactly. Yes, pollen and nectar. Thank you. Where does that come from?
Flowers.
Yeah, pretty high stakes questionnaires. Okay, where do they lay their eggs?
Who? The bees. And hives, logs, wood, roofs, shingle, leaves.
Yeah, some of them roll up
Trunks.
leaves in holes, in bricks.
Hotel.
Yeah. So do they lay them like if you've got a brick house? Are they just going to lay them on the? No. So what do? They
burrow.
They burrow. So a lot of them will find a hollow, or they'll burrow a hollow into something soft, and they'll lay their eggs in there. And they put little bits of pollen and nectar, and then plop the egg in there, and then they seal over the hole, and away they go. So we looked at different bee hotels, so little habitat that you can create for the bees to lay their eggs and make the next generation. So that's something you can do for habitat, and lots of flowers, obviously, for them to eat things. Here's one. What role or function do the bees, native bees, have in the ecosystem?
Cross-pollination. Pollination.
Yes, so they pollinate.
What looking up? Should I say?
Yeah. So pollination is the big one. So they allow plants to reproduce, and they also provide food for other animals. And this is the segue into birds. So lots of some.
Very neat, Steve, very neat.
So you get
I was
some.
going to go food for birds, and then I thought, no, everyone's going to think that's all
Yeah, well, so I'll pass over to Renee, who really, I'm sure sometimes thinks about other things than birds, but yeah, really knowledgeable. So really interesting. So yeah, some birds eat bees. And, so Renee.
So hi everybody. I'm an ecologist. I studied zoology and as much ecology and animal behaviours as I could. And while we joke that I only think about birds, actually it's not true at all, because any bird we look at, any bird we mention, any bird I might talk about or show you an image of, I'm entirely focused on the entirety of its being. How is it there? It's not going to be there without its food. It's not going to be there without its habitat. It's not going to be there without the invertebrates and the soil that enable the plants, that enable the insects, that allow it to be there. So let's just think of any animal, not just bird, in terms of everything it depends on in the whole ecosystem, and just keep that in the back of our minds all the while, which is really, it's the whole connectivity thing that is wonderful to see. So I thought we might start, because this is a Randwick event, I focus particularly on the Randwick Council area. So some of you at least may have seen the email and the links I sent earlier, and suggested if you wanted to have a look on bird data, which is the database of BirdLife Australia, and it's just fun to explore what's there. And if you look at the numbers in the whole of Randwick Council, there are a huge number of species. I think it was 262 or something in the last, maybe it's 5 years, but about 100 of those are sort of seabirds from the avid sea watchers out there, and then a whole lot more wonderful water birds. And with apologies to all those magnificent birds, today I'm going to focus on the terrestrial birds because we're more likely to be able to get those in our gardens. And I'm also going to be focusing a lot on the small birds. So again, apologies to the huge and magnificent, powerful owl which is in our area. And, you know, the biggest owl in Australia, and the magnificent sea eagles, which are ginormous and which do come over from the sea, over the land in Randwick area. And by the way, before I forget, so I don't forget at the end, you can actually watch the nesting right now live on, if you go to Facebook, Sea Eagle, Eagle Cam, at Olympic Park. There are two tiny chicks that are just over a week old. You can watch them being fed and the whole thing. And so it's apologies to all those big and wonderful and the huge yellow-tailed black cockatoos that we see here. They go down and sleep somewhere at Maroubra at least some of the year. You see them flying over at sunset. Has anybody ever seen that? Yeah. Maybe some of the Zoom people have. It's just magnificent. But we will be focusing mostly on the smaller birds. So I thought, in that vein, I wanted to also show how special this place is. As Julian said earlier, it is an amazing island of biodiversity, this Randwick Environment Park. It's only 13 hectares. We think about Centennial Park. Wow, you know, it's this fantastic place everybody knows about. I'm going to show some graphs which compare a couple of bits of Centennial Park with Randwick Environment Park using the data of 20-minute bird surveys, ethics method, etc. And you'll see the difference, why it's so special. And so I thought we might start with a little short video. Thank you. Of a tiny bird you may or may not have seen that hangs out here a lot.
Red brown?
Maybe not that too. Sure. Can everyone see that clearly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, if I'm in your range, that would be great. So has anybody ever seen this in real life?
No.
And this is partly because between here and Sydney Harbour, there is nowhere left that I know of that has them. Some years ago they were in Centennial Park, they would have been in other spots, they were even at Wilson Park many years before that, they were around the 1990s, gone. And this, and further west like the Botany Swamps, etc., that's great, they're still there, like Roos and all of that, you know, south of here, yes, north of here, this is it. That's brilliant. And there's a flock of 22 at the moment. And last year there was a flock of 37. That's not necessarily saying that something's happened to them. It just might be that new. Anyway, I just wanted to start with that amazing site. That was just on the oval on the other side here. And again, the Zoom people, I really hope you can come and do a walk around this area and discover some of these things up close, because a lot of the photos are taken here. So now we're going to go to the excuse me, Renee, what was that called? Sorry, I forgot to say. So that's the red-browed finch, easily named. Not all the birds are named as logically, as it's also got a red bottom, but nobody said that. Like the big wattlebird, the red wattlebird, which is a big honeyeater, very common around here too. One was just over there a minute ago. Has a yellow as its brightest colour. It's the red wattlebird, I mean, honestly. But this little red-browed finch, so they're fantastic. And then we saw it eating the seeds. So this is where, if we have mown grass, thoroughly mown all the time, they'll never have a hope. But if you have patches, you'll allow the grasses to go and grow and come to seed. It'll not only look beautiful, especially the native grasses, we've got so many, but it'll be able to attract all those tiny birds as well. So I can just right over. Okay, so I'm cool. All right, so here we go. Gardening on the wild side, and it's the bird habitat. So here,
Just double check that people on Zoom can see that on the screen share. Yeah. Someone just verbally say yes, you can see the screen share.
Yes, we can see the screen share.
Yes, thank you.
great. Okay, so two tiny fairy wrens that were actually photographed here as well. So some of you may have started watching what's in your area, and chances are you may have seen these wonderful, gorgeous, big and common and noisy birds. So the rainbow lorikeet, these are the kookaburras by the one on the right. See, it's got a short beak and it's all black and it's kind of chunkier and a bit browner. That's a young bird, and it takes a while till they get the tail bottom of the beak and the full length. Its tail is also in absolutely perfect condition, but the poor adult that's been feeding it all this time is a bit scraggly. Noisy miner down in the bottom left, always screaming at something, and that's our native honeyeater, not the commoner Indian miner that everybody thinks is such a problem. But it's our native honeyeater, the noisy miner that excludes just about everything else. Pretty well only the lorikeets and the kookaburras ignore it. Yeah, and so we're going to see something about the data and what it shows. And the Australian ravens. So the ravens and crows are big black birds, and it's always confusing, but our common one here is the Australian raven. It's got great big throat apples. Sometimes you can pretty well see it here. But that's our one that goes, you can see the bird that. And here, right here on the grass, the ones we might see, and we did just now, are the magpie, top left. And if some people get confused between the magpies and the currawongs, so white on the back of the neck is the magpie. And the currawongs, I don't know if the Zoom people can hear in the background, but there's hurrah, hurrah, hurrah going on, singing its name, the currawong calling in the background. The beautiful welcome swallows zooming past, so a couple of people here already told me how they love seeing them. And as they're zooming over the grass and sometimes coming right up to your feet, they are eating insects all the time. Somebody calculated, and I haven't got the reference for that, but there's a second-hand one, saying that they estimated 400 seeds a day, but of course we don't know what season that was in and how many hours, but that's, every couple of minutes another insect. And if there's a whole flock of them, just imagine how many extra insects there would be without those. Down the bottom of the wagtail, as we were just watching one here, so constantly moving and active, and again, catching insects. As you walk, you might disturb it, and the same thing, they sometimes come very close. And then the magpie lark, so the little black and white one, smaller than a magpie, but quite noisy. Peewee, that used to be its name. There's the swallow close up, magnificent shining colours. So here's the magic of this place. This part is showing some of the tiny species that we can see here at Randwick Environment Park and some sites further south. The top, so there's the red-browed finch we just saw. Then this gorgeous little thing with a yellow bottom, technical, yellow rump bongo. And down the bottom the fairy wren, so the male in full breeding colours on the left, and then the female after that, and the young male next to her. She's the one with the brown mask. So these yellow rump thornbills, for example, used to be in Centennial Park, there were two. I'm not saying I knew what was in the whole of Centennial Park, because obviously I couldn't survey that huge site all the time, but I only knew of one spot where they were, and there were two about 6 years ago, and then there was one, and I haven't seen them since. I don't think anyone else has. There is another tinier kind of form. They're still in Centennial Park, which is fantastic, and some other sites. But again, nowhere north of here that I know of with these birds. Okay, and so the fairy wrens. Here are some others. So the top left of the silver eyes, so they are in other areas as well. Some migrate all the way from Tasmania. And you can actually tell by ginger on the side and the colour of the throat and all sorts of funny details where they've come from. Are they from Western Victoria? Are they from Tasmania? Or are they maybe our local ones? Then the next one just looks like a bunch of leaves with something tiny in it. And that's, if you're lucky, that's how you normally see them. See, right here, that's all. Can you recall? Can you recall? Okay, calls might not be working, don't know why. But anyway, spotted puddle, and we should hear do 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 do, and that's a fantastic sound if you hear it. You'll see something more about that in a minute. And down the bottom is tiny honeyeater, the eastern spinebill, and black-browed scrub wren. Again, most people never get to see them because they're down on the ground, feeding and foraging in secretive places. What was the last one? White-browed scrub wren. Right, here's some data. I've got a couple of sites here. The ones on the left are Randwick and Randwick Park. The three on the right are Centennial Park. If you forget the first one for the moment, the other four are approximately equal size, but I'm not saying they're absolutely equal size. So, you know, to do this properly or publish anything like that, I would need to do it much more carefully. But this is going to show just a general pattern. So the whole bar is just the terrestrial birds. Below that, within that, are the small birds. So you can see the pattern here. And the left-hand side is what I call the spot, the eastern spot, which is where I've mentioned before, the oval entrance on the other side. And that is nowhere near the size of the whole area. It's a fraction. It's just over a hectare approximately, and yet it's so rich. So I looked at it a different way. The next graph is showing the percentage of small birds of all the terrestrial birds in those same sites. And can you see a clear pattern? Strangely, the tiniest site, that particular tiny site, has the highest percentage of small birds. And this is from 2015 to 2020. Now I correlated it with the noisy miners, the percentage of surveys that noisy miners turned up in those same sites. The two percentages, as you understand, they're slightly different things, but do you see a pattern? It's pretty clear, isn't it? And it, obviously correlation doesn't mean cause and effect, but from many other studies it is shown that noisy miners are a real threat to other species. I did look at it with pied currawongs as well. It's not as clear a pattern, but still very clearly where there are many currawongs. Now, just to say, this data is only looking at what I recorded on that particular site, so I also record what's flying far over or outside the area. I wasn't using that. I was just using the data in the site for these studies. So why? Why is it so special? Here are three shots of parts of the environment park. You know how so many parks are two-dimensional? Grass and a couple of trees. I just call that two-dimensional. And nothing in between. But look here, it's the opposite. Each of these three sites, what does it show? If you want to just take, yeah?
Undercourse, like shrub layer.
Exactly.
Different layers.
Layers. Yes, so all of that layering, right from the trees down to the ground, is densely filled in. And just ask yourself, can you see through? If you walk through a park and like this bit here, I can see right through to the other side and the next open area, the opposite of here, and that's part of the magic. So here's an aerial view of just the far side. So we're not on it at the moment, we're off to the right of the picture. And it shows one other very important thing. So many aerial views, if you look on Google Maps, might show green things and they look like they're connected, but they might only be trees with no understory, okay? So the difference here, see how it's connected all the way around the oval? And then there's the ephemeral wetland, the dry wetland, which this week had lots of water in it, and it continues all through the environment park, except for the last little bit to the south isn't so connected, but that's probably part of the secret. So if we look at what these key elements are, dense cover down to the ground, all the layering that we talked about, and diversity. You've got to have diversity because things need to flower in different times of the year, providing food or attracting insects that will then provide food all the year round. So a lot of gardens have become pretty well monocultures of one beautiful thing or two or three beautiful plants, and that's it. But that's it. They'll have their flowering season, and what does wildlife do the rest of the time? So plants which attract insects, and I'm particularly focusing on insect attracting because in our areas we've just got so much in the way of large nectar flowers, large nectar trees and bushes, and that's particularly attracting the noisy miners and the rainbow lorikeets, and that's not helping the small birds. Spiky plants are fantastic for shelter and for nesting. Clean fresh water, so that needs to be changed frequently with shelter near the water. Mulch, logs, other places like little rock piles and things for creatures to hide in, and connectivity we talked about. So I'm going to race through the habitat needs of, I'm just looking at the time, so habitat needs of some small species. So I'll have to go quite quickly through this, but obviously the wrens need tiny little insects, tiny spiders and so on, water, safe source, and lots of shelter. So the bottom pictures are, they built a beautiful dome nest. That was in Centennial Park some years ago, and it was just in a pile of weedy grasses that had grown up over a dead tree. And far from a distance with my telescope, I was watching this feeding. Every few minutes, one of the family, it's the family that feed the young, not just a male and female, every few minutes would be bringing food. It was really exciting. 2 days later, I came back, no action. And when I zoomed in and looked a bit closer, there were all these little feathers around it. But it was intact. So it hadn't been ripped apart by some big predator cat or something. Maybe a currawong. Currawongs need maybe the equivalent of about 40 broods of fairy wrens to raise their young in a season. Anyway, here are some of the dangers. Cats, currawongs, and cuckoos that parasitise their nests, would you believe? And there's a lot of fascinating stuff to read about that, but I've got some resources we can send later, including something about that. It's really interesting. So do you think one garden is enough for a fairy wren party? There'll be the male and the female, and there'll be helpers at the nest from previous broods. They have to go and link with others. So particularly the young males stay, the young females go off and find a new territory and have to join another family. So they need connectivity because they need to be able to go across to other family groups and find a safe place to be. So this research study by Holly Parsons and the others near Wollongong in Dapto, had a satellite track on a female for 5 days. She used 27 different gardens. And obviously she was surviving there, but was she thriving there? Is her family able to breed? We don't know that. But 27 gardens, but maybe your garden, when you make it rich and bountiful, will be the one to make the difference. So again, the beautiful red-browed finches, and I won't spend too long because we talked about them, but they need those long seeding plants. And the woolly wagtail, in fact, it's calling right now. I don't know if you can hear it. If you look close up at the nest, can you see the grey stuff that it's made of? So it might be a bit hard to see from here, but the zoomers should see. So they use grasses and spider webs. So they need spiders in two ways. They might feed on little spiders, but they can't breed. They can't build their nest until the weather warms up and lots of spiders are building their webs. And then they can use the webs to build their nest. So you see how everything's interconnected? And they're very feisty. They'll chase away anything at nesting season. Look at that. Okay, so predators. Here's one that I photographed at Monty. If you've got a dog, please don't let it do this because the wagtail got away, but just imagine the energy that it takes to constantly be chased and escape, energy that it might need to feed and raise young. So the tiny honeyeater, the new Holland Honeyeater, shown feeding here. Both these were taken at Randwick Environment Park on eucalyptus and tickbush, Kunzia. I'm not sure if you've done that one already in your list, but I think it's on the list. A fantastic plant. The nest in the bottom left was actually in a lomandra next to the path at Gordons Bay a few years ago. Right next to the path. I could have touched it, although I wouldn't. It had one egg in it. again, I came back again, and the egg had been pierced by something. So it didn't survive. Maybe it wasn't the best place to try, but they'll do that even this close to the ground. And here's this magnificent spotted pardalote. So I wish the call would work. But and you can look up the calls in the link I sent you earlier on the Birds in Backyard site. You can listen to the calls and learn them as well. So usually we don't see them. They're way up in the top of a eucalyptus somewhere, pecking. So there's a picture of a leaf there with little white bits. And they're the sugary coating made by tiny insects called psyllids. They look like miniature cicadas. And the psyllids make this sugary coating because there's too much sugar in the sap. And they exude it. They also make a protective coating with it. And guess who loves it? Spotted pardalotes, rainbow lorikeets, and noisy miners. And I grew up looking at the canopy of a tree where every day the spotted pardalotes would go peck, taking the lerps off. What they're doing is obviously they need the tree and they need the lerps because that's the insects from the lerps are their food. But as well, they're helping the trees because sometimes those things explode. So someone can't hear. Yep. Okay. So sometimes the populations explode, and that can really damage the eucalyptus trees. So the trees need the pardalotes to keep cleaning them. The noisy miners, on the other hand, at least the bell miners, and it may be true of the noisy miners, don't always eat the insect that makes the lerps. So that insect keeps making more and more lerps, keeps damaging the trees. Whereas with the pardalote, it'll eat the insect and help the tree. And they, funnily enough, nest right down in a burrow on the ground. And that short tunnel is ridiculous because they can dig a burrow a metre long and then build a beautiful bark nest at the end. And they used to nest right over there in a mound, in a messy mound, which is gone. But they are nesting over near the bridge. So if you do come and walk, Zoom people, if you do come and walk, there's a bridge on the diagonally opposite end of the park. And twice last year I saw them nesting in the bank there. So you might be lucky enough to see that. So look at these magnificent gardens. Unfortunately, this is all too often what we're seeing. Minimal habitat, minimal species, nowhere to be, no food, no homes, nothing. I was going to put a little caricature of a bird crying, but I thought that was but we can do this. We can use what we've seen works from the similar images I showed you before of the other side of the environment park, and we can try and recreate that model. And of course, that's what you're doing right throughout the whole course, from the very first one, which I saw Steve talking about the whole ecological focus and the whole linkages and the importance of all the parts of the habitat. And so start with what you've got. So most people will have at least a couple of trees or bushes, even if it's mostly two-dimensional. And even if you've got a patch of weeds at the back, don't necessarily pull them all out because that might be where all the good stuff's hiding. And until you provide an equivalent area to give that density and the food resources that the insects and the little animals need, I would keep it. And the same goes on a bigger scale with lantana, and that's exactly what's been happening on the other side here. There's a lot of lantana. People sometimes get very upset. Why isn't council getting rid of the lantana? Because it's spiky, it's got a lot of habitat, it attracts a lot of insects, and it protects a lot of creatures, not only fairy wrens and others, but lizards, etc. And so the bush care people have been slowly inching away at it, a couple of metres at a time over many, many, many years. And the rate of growth of that alternative habitat is phenomenal. And I hope we'll go and see it, some of us. And so I'm just going to race you through how we might create it from the ground up. So starting with one of the plants I believe you did in the first week, which is the violet, the beautiful native violet, and other ground covers. And then some of the clumping plants. So then Dianella. Have you looked at Dianellas yet? Beautiful purple flowers and then purple berries, and the lomandras. And here the lomandras often have beautiful eastern dwarf tree frogs in them. They're just incredible. The one over near where you can't park the car, a couple of years ago after early morning rain there were 6 that I saw, so who knows how many more there were, and they're about as big as half your thumb. And of course rising up to the small bushes. So the yellow one in the middle is a Acacia ulicifolia, prickly Moses, which is quite a small and dense. The prickles are only short, but it's a fabulous one and beautiful when it flowers. The one above it is, sorry, it might be quite hard to see, but it's a Grevillea sericea. So that, again, instead of getting the big showy hybrid Grevilleas, the noisy minors, oh, thank you, beautiful. There it is. Look at that. Absolutely stunning. It'll have a shorter flowering period than those big spiky, those big showy ones, but you can plant, you know, a few of these and then a few of the red type and a few of the different species, and they'll flower at different times through the year and give you the same pleasure. The noisy minors will protect the hybrid Grevilleas vehemently because they are a really regular sugar hit for them much of the year around. Whereas with these ones, maybe, if there's enough shelter, etc., maybe they won't fight as much and chase everything away. Maybe it won't be worth their while, and therefore the smaller ones will have a go. And so, of course, as well as all the wonderful pollinators, and there's a very strange, wonderful big bee or fly in the photo, which is hard to see, and I'm not sure what it is. I need to ask Elke or...
It was a green metallic carpenter bee.
Oh, wow. It was about that big. It was beautiful. And, of course, some of the honeyeaters, it's like that eastern spinebill, will delicately put their beak in and get the nectar out. On the far left, there's a beautiful coria. So some of the corias are tubular, and that's a coria, one of the coria reflexa group. Again, the eastern spinebill has it. And I know you looked at coria alba the first week, and that's not really deep at all. It's quite an open flower. But, again, I've seen eastern spinebills feeding on them right here and near the entrance of the environment park. I keep pointing that way, don't I? It's just as well that way. And then we're going higher and higher. So really spiky Hakea teretifolia, and there are a couple of others, Gibbosa, etc. They're fantastic shelter. And again, they have similar sort of flowers with nectar and will be insect attracting. And on the right, rather than go for the giant trees, I've gone for Alocasuarina, which is one of the sort of smaller casuarinas, and Acacia terminalis. So Steve may have mentioned that some of the acacias are quite short-lived, and so you sort of need a succession plan. But in the time they have there, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's not just the beauty of the flowers; it's all of what it attracts and the shelter that it provides.
Where can you buy them?
Sorry?
Where can you buy them?
So the community nursery grows a few of the endemic species, not that many. The Randwick Community Nursery, it's worth checking what they have.
Is there a website? Or?
There is a website and they have a monthly species list, but there's meant to be an asterisk for the endemic species, but there are actually a few more that don't have asterisks. So it's worth getting a list of the suitable species and then checking. And there's another place called Indigigrow. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's an indigenous one at La Perouse that works from the school. And they grow a lot of the eastern suburbs Banksia scrub species now, which is absolutely brilliant.
Oh, cool.
And Renee, just in about 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, our session here will be going to the nursery. So we get to see
great.
behind the scenes there.
Oh, even better. So we've done our layering from the ground up to the trees, small trees, and in between, don't forget the vines, because the vines are not only stunning and flower beautifully, but they connect everything. And often you'll get the small birds nesting where the dense part of the vine is on the dense part of the bush, and that's just perfect. So there are 3 there. One comes free with a hoverfly, the one on top, the clematis, and below that is, coincidentally, my other plant for the day, the appleberry. Total coincidence.
You made this one here.
Oh, you did find it. Great. Thank you. Oh, look at this. Thank you. It's this beautiful, graceful twiner. Just beautiful. And it's got tiny little tubular flowers, I think, and then edible fruits. But you need to check about the details of that. I think the indigenous people did not eat them fresh. Okay, don't take my word for it, but do check up. But they're definitely a potential bush food, but you need to check. So that's the appleberry and the gorgeous purple Hardenbergia violacea. And so when you create all of that habitat, as we talked about, all the ecological links, all these invertebrates, the tiny ones, there'll be plant eaters, there'll be predators, there'll be the spiders coming in, there'll be all kinds of amazing parts of the ecosystem. and then they will provide food for the birds directly. Plus, of course, they will then entice the tiny lizards and the frogs if you've got water as well. And it's just wonderful what you can create. So bird baths, of course, they need water. These 3 photos are from a friend of mine. I've got her name on there. And a bird bath doesn't have to be bought as a bird bath. It can be a simple container that you reinvent for a second purpose, or a plant base, or if you can create a beautiful pond. If you've got space, it doesn't have to be big, but see the elements of stone. Stone piles are great for lizards to hide in and the frogs to hide in. And hidden in that rock, which is the same rock at the back, are 11 silver eyes that were on migration. That was actually in Canberra, that one. The one on the top with the New Holland Honeyeaters actually shows some other elements. It shows you need shelter next to the bird bath, but you also need an open side so that they have a clear view and they can dive in and out if they want to, but they can dive into the shelter when needed. And behind that is a great big dead log. So we mentioned logs, and we'll mention logs again. So here are some of the other elements. I know I apologise to all the big birds by being sizist and looking mostly at the small birds, but here's a gorgeous eastern rosella. We love the rainbow lorikeets because of their colour, but guess what? About 40 years ago, they weren't in Sydney, or hardly. And it was the eastern and the crimson rosellas that took up sort of that place in the habitat. And the rainbow lorikeets have outcompeted them, probably for the nest hollows. But right here again, we sometimes see eastern rosellas. Has anyone ever seen them in this area? Also at Maroubra. So that's great that they're still around. And that one was feeding on Dianella berries in Centennial Park. It's not often seen in Centennial Park. Now here's a poor old, see that ugly pole? It's a pole in Canberra, which they use for their electricity poles now. They're these prefab funny concrete things with slits. And it's just big enough for an eastern rosella to stick its head in, but it can't get in. And they try and they try and they try and they can't get in. So there's a shortage of hollows. So what we can do is provide nest boxes. And on the screen there, I've got 2 different resources. So the Birds in Backyards website has actual patterns and sizes suggested for different species, nest boxes. And below that is another one called Nest Box Tales. So a woman called Alice McGlashan has done a fantastic study, even suggesting a smaller opening size. So, for example, if you build a nice box with a big enough opening, the rainbow lorikeets will be in there at a flash, and it might be bees, and it might be common miners, it might be other things that you didn't necessarily want. But if you make it just the right size and no bigger, and a few other features like a way to climb up, then you might be lucky enough to get a rosella in there. And crimsons are a bit bigger, so you might even be able to get an eastern rosella, who knows, if it's in the area. And obviously the beautiful native bees, so you talked about those already. There's a Rolls Royce of a beehive on the right here that a friend made for her. There's mulch, there are logs, there are little rock piles, and of course you wouldn't think of taking rock from bush rock because that's just an awful thing to do. But if you have access to rocks, or someone's demolishing a site and you are able to get some of those, then that's a great way of adding habitat. And please, 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 no pesticides, because by creating all of this fabulous biodiversity, you'll have your natural pest control. And, you know, if you're growing a fantastic veggie garden, the little fairy wrens and all those other ones would be pecking and the willy wagtails, they'll be pecking all your insect pests off. You could do some manual control, and unfortunately, any pesticides will also kill the other insects, the beneficial insects that control them. So there's a cheeky praying mantis peeping out from sideways from a plant on top, and down the bottom is the whole life cycle of a ladybird, one of the ladybirds, from larva to pupa to the adult. And they're all really fabulous and beneficial insects that you want in your garden, and you don't want to kill them with pesticides. I don't know why that one went sideways. Is it sideways on the screen? Oh dear. If you want to turn, that's really strange. That is a fantastic link, and I can send you the link. That's very easy. Habitat Network and Planting Small Bird Habitat Haven in your garden. But I've got the link for you if you want. Don't know why that went sideways. Never mind. So there's so much that we can do. Okay, so we talked about creating new habitat in a bare area. Layering and layering and layering. I can't say that enough. It's also so beautiful. just to mention that here, this whole area outside the classroom was very, very bare a few years ago. And with Steve's help, I mean, this whole area has been thriving. And there's a whole new patch over there from 1 year ago, 1.5 years.
Close to it, 1 or 2
And it's already, the plant's already this big. I mean, the rapidity of habitat creation is amazing. And this one on the right-hand side here, it's around the corner, got the tick of approval this week because the fairy wrens came out of the eastern suburbs Banksia scrub, through the fence, and almost to the door of the classroom. And I haven't seen them there in all the years that I've been coming. But the habitat is obviously dense enough and thick enough that they felt safe, which is fantastic. And obviously the things we talked about, water mulch, logs, insect hotels, nest boxes, all of those great things, corridors. So if you can inspire your neighbours and your friends and your kids' schools, and it's corridors that we need, it's that connectedness, like we saw the aerial view of the environment park here, and the Birds of Backyard's website has a whole section on finding birds and identifying them. It's got a whole section on creating habitat, including if you're interested in looking at some of the evidence, there's a reference paper as well. And enjoy, just enjoy what you've created, and the birds will come, and you might get nesting like right here and in your own garden or in your own local patch that you've worked together with your friends and neighbours for. So there's supposed to be beautiful bird calls finishing off, but you'll have to imagine them. Yeah, Harold and a few others. There you go.
Yeah, there's a little...
They might be before they were. Yeah. Oops. Yeah. Time is good. We've still got another video. But probably not. That's fine. So, I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea of some. And there are many other bits of Randwick that I could focus on too. Maroubra South is another great area for diversity.
There's a question from Belinda.
Hi, Belinda.
Hi, Renee. Belinda here.
Hi.
We're just talking about corridors. How wide and how long do corridors need to be? How big do they need to be to, make them usable?
That's a great question, and I don't really know the answer within the urban environment. Greening Australia did some work a few years ago where they looked at where they're extremely limited by funding and they're able to do dense patches of planting in completely bare agricultural areas. They were actually looking at how far apart they need to be for exactly what you're asking. To be far enough apart that you can afford to do it, but close enough that there'll be an impact and the birds can travel between them. I'm sorry to say I don't remember the exact figure of what they came up with, but that would be a paper well worth finding. And in the urban area, I would just say make it as wide and as dense and with as many neighbours as you possibly can, because when you think of if you're able to only do a back corner of your garden, let's say, but your other 3 neighbours who share that back corner will be able to, that will have a huge increased impact, but I don't have any actual data on that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Renee, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What role do people who have balconies, how can we help?
Oh, brilliant. So I was going to put more photos in, but it was, there was enough already. So quite a lot of these plants really do well in pots. Outside my front door, I've got a hardened berger that's absolutely thriving and just finishing off flowering, but it's been flowering for more than a month. And that's actually escaped. Its roots have escaped into a pot with the leptospermum, the tea tree that's got tiny little white flowers and is just bursting into bloom right now. So that's been thriving in a pot for quite a few years. And also the Epacris microphylla, is that on your list? The tiny little, anyway, look it up, Epacris. So there are quite a lot of the species that will be able to, and even if the birds don't come, you might attract the insects and you'll be helping enormously that way, and maybe the birds will come. You can grow a lot in containers.
Thank you.
You had a question?
About cats, because I read that cats kill more than 3 million per year, especially small birds for sure.
Yeah, so the question is what can we do about cats? So cats are gorgeous animals, but not native to Australia. Voracious and efficient predators, and they have an enormous impact. So if you do have a cat, please keep it inside, or some people make an amazing cat run. So it's kind of free to have a big roamy area, but confined within a given space. And ideally, if they're not, people think if we put a bell on or if we feed it well, it's their instinct to hunt. They're going to hunt no matter what. So you can, if you need to, safely have a cat and look after the wildlife. But if you want to, yeah. It would be different in Europe where the whole habitat, they're still hunters, but they evolved there, so you would think differently. Did someone else have a question on the Zoom? I think I heard.
Is there an active thing to get rid of the Indian miners?
I know that some councils have over many years. I'm not sure what the current situation is with that. And it's interesting. So the Indian or the common miners do compete with other native birds, for nest hollers. They often nest in buildings or any hole in space that you might want to find. But in fact, in terms of the impact on the small birds, it's the native noisy miner that has the greater impact than the common miner. Yeah, some studies have shown.
The only way you can deal with that is by making the habitat more suited to smaller birds.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for getting me to clarify that. So in a way, by creating the extra dense habitat, you're actually helping in two ways. So by all the obvious ways of creating the safe space, but also noisy miners don't like it. They don't hang out there. It's just amazing. And so, do you remember the graphs I showed you where the correlation showed with the noisy miners? So that tiny little patch, they're around, they're very close. They'll come and feed in the big eucalypts and they will chase things, far overhead. They, for some reason, do not hang about in that area. And I actually think it might be partly to do with the fact that there are not many eucalypts actually in the main patch of the eastern suburbs Banksia scrub. So there's great layering, but the tallest things might be Banksias and the Acacia terminalis species. Whereas right next to it are these amazing, I think they're swamp mahoganies. Are they swamp mahoganies that are flowering at the moment? I'm not quite sure, but just along between here and there. But once you get past that bit, the noisy miners don't use it. So you're helping twice. And that's where Belinda's question about the size of the patch, if I knew the actual answer, I don't know. But it isn't an enormous patch. It's bigger than any backyard, but it's not an enormous patch. And probably only a few hectares. And that's clearly having an impact with noisy miners all around it, but they don't hang around in the middle of it much.
We have also a conversation with the parks here in Sydney that they don't use, because I know that depending park and more parks are using a lot of glyphosates and other chemicals, but a lot of glyphosate. And do you have also a conversation with them how they can decrease that so the insects can still be alive and the birds can come?
Yeah, it's a really good issue. I mean, I don't, personally, but if it's a question for bird life, it would be a good one to raise.
Is there someone in the council who does that?
No. Julian?
I missed the question.
About the use of pesticides and glyphosate.
What about?
For knowing that they can be risky, whether there's some discussion about reducing them. I think some councils stopped.
I think we don't use
temporarily.
glyphosate at all.
Is it Randwick who stopped?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's depending on what park they which council that?
That's not Randwick Council.
No, I know, but I thought maybe because you're a specialist.
Might be Waverley or the
Well, they're
specialists that can talk to the council.
So while Centennial Park is technically within the Randwick Council area, it has its own Centennial Park and Moore Park Authority, I think it's called, or something like that. So it would be well worth approaching them.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
Because I think also if you can use different chemicals here, I don't know what they use in that mix, but I think slash they use, and they have benefits of that. Maybe they can tell them how to use it. So
that's a great idea. Yeah.
One more question.
Okay. I've got a question. Can I have a turn again?
Sure.
Can you hear me, Renee? Oh, Renee, it's Belinda again. Look, sorry, I don't know if you mentioned this because my internet just dropped out, but on Centennial Park, I was really disappointed that they had so few small birds compared to large birds. And I know they've got a small bird habitat project. Do you think that will help? Do you think, what do they need to do to get more small birds back?
Right. So yeah, I didn't want to go into too much in the time we had, but the 3 sites in Centennial Park were the southwest corner, where a lot of people don't ever go. It's actually now a bit noisy because it's near Allison Road where the trams are, but there's a bit of ESBS, Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub remnant there, and some diversity left. And then in the central area around Lachlan Swamp, used to be very diverse. That's where red bradfinches used to nest in the 1990s, but longer. And yellow thornbills used to be there, but now they're only in the south bit. And in the north, there is pretty well no understory left. You could draw a line across half of Centennial Park. I've got some mapping I can show you or send you. Pretty well draw a line across the centre of Centennial Park. Other than swallows, small birds, if they're there, they're in the south, none in the north. And that's why there was that tiny little bar at the bottom of the northern bit, which was one. And so the Habitat Creation Project is fantastic. It would be great if they started doing it throughout the park and not just in the really lower bits in the south.
All right. Thank you, Renee. That was awesome. Well,
Welcome.
so just quickly recap. Renee did cover the plants of today mostly. So this is the Grevillea. Did anyone catch it? Sericea. Yeah, which is on page. Julian. Anyway, you'll find it. Grevillea Sericea pink spider flower, particularly good for birds.
Page 19.
Page 19. This one, apple dumpling plant, otherwise known as
Appleberry.
appleberry.
On page 25.
Page 20.
B-E-R-R-Y, berry.
Yeah, it literally gets a long kind of berry-like fruit on it that perhaps you can eat. And what tree? What was a tree that you?
Acacia terminalis. I'm really kind of proposing the tall bushes rather than the big trees, which trees are magnificent, don't get me wrong, but only because we have a framework of quite a lot of big trees. And it's, yeah.
So Acacia terminalis, it's not on our list, but look it up.
And sorry, the other one, the dumpling, the appleberry wasn't in the list either.
It is. I think it accidentally got put in under tree in the tree section.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it is page 25, but it's in the wrong section.
Oh, okay.
It's just to see if you notice things. So that's like a climbing ground covery, scrambly type thing.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned, that's not on the list either, but I think you mentioned she oaks, Alocasuarina.
Yes.
Yeah, so some of your she oaks are good for birds.
Yeah, fantastic. So in terms of the larger birds, the black cockatoos will come and crunch and crackle and get the seeds out of the out of the pods. And in the north side, they're still getting glossy black cockatoos, which are quite endangered, and they need casuarinas particularly for their food. But also the casuarinas over the other side here are quite scrubby, and they're planted in a cluster. So that's the other thing. Often it's good to plant a few of a species. Obviously, take note of how big it's going to spread and how tall and all the rest of it. But if you plant a few, you'll have a bigger impact, of course. And because they're quite close and dense, the little red-browed finches actually nest in there. I've seen them build nests there in past years. So, good for many.
So really useful, yeah.
And the wrens use them and lots. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So normally at this point we do a round robin with all the Zoomers just to capture people's memories from what we talked about today. We don't have time. There's 25 of you, so we probably we won't go to everybody, but I'll get you guys to just shout out in a kind of orderly fashion, just things that you remember from today, from the last hour, particularly.
Oh, Kit's got a hand up.
Go for it.
Thanks, Kit.
Wagtail nests using spider webs.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
And it's got wagtails have two relatives, smaller fantails that come through on migration. There's a grey fantail and a rufous fantail. They're beautiful, a bit smaller and delicate, and they have a refinement, so they build with spider webs too, and then they have like a wine glass not the base, but the stem as well, dangling down. Just beautiful.
Anyone else from Zoom? Something you remember?
Layers.
Layers.
It's all about the layers.
You got it. Well, absolutely.
Thank you.
Come on, a couple more.
Bird baths. I'm Nikki. Hello. Bird baths with having a clear line of sight, but also having shelter close by.
And I didn't go into it a lot, but again, on the Birds in Backyard site, there's a whole lot of information about bird baths because you do need to be able to clean them, not with any chemical, but you do need to clean them very regularly so that diseases are not spread and so on, and just fill them with fresh water, and that'll also prevent any mosquito larvae developing. And yeah, there's a lot of information about that and ponds and so on.
And can I just ask about those? Are they better raised off the ground or on the ground?
Yeah, so for predators, it's safer off the ground, but some people actually do a couple of bird baths and don't stick with just one. Some people might have something in or on the ground at the back of their house and a raised one hanging in a tree at the front, and you might find different birds come and use both. So yeah, if it's hanging and it's very flimsy, some of the larger birds may not like to shelter in it, to use it. So I haven't actually tried that, but good to experiment.
Time for a couple more.
Can I ask a question? This, it's more for you, Julian, but will this beautiful talk that we've had and the bees from last week, is this on, where can we find these recordings?
So this will ultimately end up on YouTube.
Yep.
And we're just, they're massive files, so we're dealing with some of the stuff around.
The bee one wasn't there from last week, was it? Because I was looking.
No, it's no.
Yeah.
We're about 4 weeks behind.
The presentation with the pictures. And
It was just hard for us to read the text from that.
Yeah.
It'll appear.
get it in our email.
Well, so
can
parts of that will be on the YouTube, won't it?
Yes.
So that's probably the best way. Or if there are particular things, and I do have some resources. Aside from what I sent you before, I've got a whole bunch of resources that, if Julian doesn't mind, we could send to people who want to. And also, I would really encourage a couple of things. So it's so exciting to think that all of you might be now. Not now because of me, but I mean because of the whole program, going out and planting these diverse habitats. What's great is if you choose a couple of fixed spots from your garden or your house and photograph as things develop. And after a year, after 2 years, after 3 years, you'll be amazed at the rate of growth and the rate of change. If there are any kids in the family, that could be a lovely project they might want to be involved in. And the other thing is recording it. So if you're happy to use bird data and upload your data, then again, as your garden develops, you might be able to show and proudly see the difference with what comes. Now,
So we might say goodbye. Do you guys want to say goodbye? Bye-bye. And don't forget, sending out a feedback form.
Thank
we love
you.
feedback.
Bye, thank you.
Also, next week is the results. Definitely check it.
great.
Bye-bye, everyone on Zoom.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.